Welcome to another episode of How We Love Now. I am Arela Gacko. I am a clinical psychologist and the CEO of Repair App.
I'm Keana, the COO of Chima.
Today on the show, we have Dr. Pedro Ballester as our guest speaker, who also happens to be my husband. And the reason that we asked for him to be on the show is because he works at the intersection of AI, tech, and mental health care. And Kiana and I were talking a bit about different questions that we have in terms of how AI works, how users perceive AI features in technology, and also what is the future of AI in the mental health world? What is the future of AI in the relationship space as well? So we're very excited to have Pedro today.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime. Pedro, can we get started just by telling us a little bit about yourself and the current work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I started my career by doing computer science, and then I did my master's in computer science. And then at that point, I realized that I would really like to work in the health sciences space. The main interest I had was in psychiatry. So I found a group to work in this subfield of psychiatry that touches computer science called computational psychiatry. So I did my PhD on that, trying to understand a bit about how can we use AI to improve care, to improve prognosis, to understand better how mental health disorders work. So I worked with OCD, I worked with schizophrenia, sorts of different mental health disorders. And then now I work at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, also in AI for health. But this time I'm working in cancer, where we discover new subtypes and try to find new ways of diagnosis. And then I co-founded Repair with Arela, and now we're doing all of the engineering of an AI app, and that's crazy. But yeah, it's fun too.
My goodness. I just want to say, you have an impressive background. There's so many people that can, just learn off of you and off of you both. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
It is an interesting journey being married and co-founders at the same time, and both of us being in the mental health space. So there's a lot of heated debates that we have in the household, that's for sure.
Definitely, yeah. And I like to think that because Repair is a relationship app that, you put the relationship, it's a constant test, right? Where you're working together and try to do feature development with your partner and all that. It's crazy. And then it gets so much more heated than when you're
Yeah.
talking to like a coworker because you're so much more intimate, right? So I like to think that a lot of the conversations about Repair end up becoming the things that really drive inspiration to building features for the
Yeah.
app itself. So it's an interesting situation, I think.
But I will say this is so important because I feel like a lot of couples and families both have leadership roles. And maybe a wife and a husband, both working as CEO in different companies or leadership executive roles. And this just shows that you can work together, right? You can have those healthy debates, right?
Yeah,
So that's so important.
That's why we're building an app so we can have those heated debates in a more effective way.
that's true.
So, Pedro, one of the things that I think would be really helpful for people to know, for listeners to know, anyone who is in mental health, anyone who is a non technical founder building products using AI, can you give us a really simple explanation of what is AI and how does it actually work? Because for a lot of us, there's a lot of questions. It seems like it's an all-knowing being. At least that's how I feel about ChatGPT, where I can talk to it about everything and it gives these perfect responses. So can you tell us a bit about how it actually works, what it looks like on the back end of things?
Yeah, absolutely. AI is actually a very old field as far as fields go of science. That maybe not that old. It's a lot of it comes from the 1900s. Uh, Most of the developments these days are a subfield of AI in the machine learning, called machine learning, right? That a lot of people talk about. And really, a lot of the basic research of what drives ChatGPT and all of these different technologies, a lot of that was developed in the 80s and the 90s, but we didn't have the computational power or the data to make these things viable. And
Mhm.
then in 2012, 13, some groups put forward the use of GPUs. So that's why NVIDIA became such a big player in the AI market. So GPUs became the thing that really, yeah,
Sorry,
of course.
I just want to jump in. What is a GPU?
Okay. So a GPU, when you have a computer, usually, with gaming and all of that, you're using GPUs. When you're doing random processing of data or when you're opening a browser or something like that, you're using the CPU. So the GPU was originally made for like video processing, and a lot of these developments came from the gaming space, and gaming was booming. So GPUs
Mhm.
became very, very good. And then somebody decided to put the AI tools inside the GPU, and then turns out you can do 1,000 times faster, 10 times faster computations inside the GPU. So, and then 2012, 13, there's this one that we're now like, okay, hey, we can actually put all these things in the GPU and start processing insane amounts of data. And that's what happened, right? It really is a computational shift. And then the building blocks are having data and having computational power. With those two things, you basically feed, again, large amounts of data into a model, and then you train it over a large period of time. And then the model is going to learn from whatever types of data that you have. In the case of ChatGPT, you're basically feeding it the internet. You're saying, hey,
Mm.
this is what, this is our text. And then it tries to understand language. And then in the final steps, you try to tell ChatGPT how to respond to people. Those are the main building blocks of how AI is going right now and where it came from.
Honestly, I was gonna say, honestly, by you saying that, it made me think of like why there's so many AI companions for gamers, like the anime
And
aspect, and like I see why it's so prevalent in today's day and age.
Curious, how do language models work? So people keep talking about ChatGPT as a language model. It really does feel like you're talking to a person who has access to a lot of information. How does it actually work? Can ChatGPT truly think and analyze things?
yeah, so the main way a large language model is trained, well, the first part of its training is to try to understand language and how to generate. You basically imagine like you get a Wikipedia page, and then you put a bunch of blanks on the text. And then you train a model that will fill out these blanks. So you can imagine that after you train for 1,000, a million pages, then you have a model that understands how to fill out blanks. So what's essentially learning is how to create sentences, how sentences work, how they are structured, how they're organized, what words go where, right? As a result of that, it understands semantics, the meaning behind each of the words. After you have a model that understands language and can fill out blanks, you get that model, and then we call it like either multiple steps of training, or you do a fine tuning to a specific task. And that task would be to respond to people, to answer questions. So
Mhm.
you get all this knowledge from the internet, and now you have a small data set just of Q&As. Now that data set is becoming bigger and bigger because people are using ChatGPT so much, right? But in the beginning, it was very small, of examples of questions and examples of answers. Now it's becoming, that's where you can introduce some personality to it. That's where you can introduce, but the main thing behind it is we call a token predictor, a word predictor, something that knows which word goes where. There's this idea too that ChatGPT kind of like learns about you, but in reality, this model is frozen. It doesn't have any needs or desires. It's just frozen in time. And then what it really learns from you is basically whatever. So opening up some interesting tricks, for example, the chat history, all of it goes into the same at the same time when you ask a new question.
Mm.
So it knows the history of the conversation, but it's not like it's learning anything new about you. And then they have these things called, I think they call it memories, where basically they add to another database. So whenever a question that you ask is whenever there's something relevant to answer a question that you talked about before, they basically go there, grab it, and to the question. So it's almost like every question that you ask, you put every part of the history and some memories into it, and then you send it. And then the model is going to do what it always does, which is predict tokens and try to figure out what to say.
I mean, I guess my question for all of us is why are users and clients so compelled to use AI versus talking to an actual human? And I can answer by like my initial thought process is maybe because we're training the AI to speak to us and how to respond to us.
Totally. That's a big component is if you're building a product, right? You want people to use it more, part of the personality of the model. And that's why they had to roll back some of the changes that they had made because the model was basically validating and agreeing with everything that you were saying. those are things that we introduced to it. The model
Right.
itself has no there was no reason for it. Yeah.
What I'm hearing is that it doesn't necessarily have the ability to think. It's not thinking about the response, rather using this large data set to predict the words that would come next in a sentence. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. For the most part, that's what it's doing. And then even like that new feature that they call thinking, which is it's a fair name for it, I think, but it's also doing that. It's giving it space to generate intermediate words to think a process through. And that's because we see sometimes if you now with the new models, what you can see is that it starts an answer and it starts wrong, and then it starts to generate, and at some point it notices that there's a logical issue, and then it can backtrack some of that information. So adding more space for the model to quote unquote think, but just to predict more tokens, allows it to give better answers. So it's not really thinking, it's just spilling more information. But it's awesome. I think it's awesome, but it's not in any way like sentient, you know?
Because one of the things while you guys are both speaking, I'm like, that makes sense why when I use AI, it doesn't tell me any new information. It just tells me what I just repeated, but in a obviously more glassed out way.
Yeah. And how does it mimic emotions? Because sometimes it's so validating in the
Yeah.
response and it's so easy. No matter how wrong I am, it's so easy to go to ChatGPT and it will validate me and I'll feel so justified in the way that I'm handling situations.
Mhm.
How does it mimic emotions when it doesn't have emotions?
Well, I wouldn't say that it mimics emotion. I think it just mimics emotional language, right? It just says the right thing. But in reality, it all comes down to the data set. What do you want out of an assistant tool, right? You want something that will agree with you. You want something that, well, at least on average, right? You want something that, yeah, for the most part, they'll agree with you and they'll give you information, but that will be nice that, all these things, there's no reason for it to be nice. There's no reason for it to be, all of that is the data set. And then as a company, OpenAI and all their peers, what they're thinking of is how can I make this most user friendly? How can I make people increase the engagement? And then if it's rude to you, and we can definitely do that, we can definitely create a copy of ChatGPT that will be rude. If it's rude to you, maybe the engagement will be lower
Mhm.
unless if it's for a niche of the internet that would want to play around with a rude robot. But apart from that, it's just all about really putting that Q&A small data set that I talked about, focused on giving positive answers, focusing on agreeing with the user, and then you can get the AI doing exactly that. There's other issues that come with that, of course, but that's how it goes.
That makes sense because when our emotions are heightened and we use ChatGPT, it makes us feel good. That's what keeps us coming back, you know? It's like, I'm not going to listen to this human, this my spouse, right? I'm going to listen to someone who cares, this tool that cares about me because they know exactly everything about me.
Yeah.
But actually, it's just a statistical program that's giving you the words that it analyzes that you think you might want to hear in those moments.
Hmm.
Exactly. Wow. Thank you for breaking that down, Pedro.
No problem there.
I wanted to talk a little bit about agents because in a lot of the tech space right now, agents seems to be the next big thing. Everyone is working on agentic AI. What does that actually look like? And what would be different about creating agents for relationship apps, for example, versus a therapy-based app, if there is a difference?
Yeah. The what an agent means, it's quite funny because every time there's a bone in a field I find, or at least I've seen it a lot in AI, the term get coined and they mutate very quickly. I'll tell you what I perceive an agent to be, but that's literally just not, it's one of many ways of seeing it. To me, it's when you have AI models take multiple steps to generate answers and at times collaborate with other AI models or right. So again, a bit maybe too simplistic way of defining that, but I think it's a pretty simple way of going about things. So the main thing that's happening is that when you ask a question to ChatGPT, it runs once. You ask a question, it provides an answer. Of course, that running once means it's generating a token and a token each time, but it's there's a very direct and linear process to this. What an agent does is that you imagine you can put ChatGPT in a loop and you can ask a question instead of saying, hey, if you ask about the weather, right? Right now, if you ask ChatGPT about the weather, it'll probably tell you something completely insane that makes no sense because it has no information about the weather whatsoever. It would have information about the weather if you create a way for it to fetch the data from the internet, from an API or for some website, and then come back to it. And now it gets that information, interprets it, and then responds. So you need something that's running in a loop. And while it's running in a loop, it has access to other agents, it has access to other tools to provide the best answer. So that's how you can ask an agent to generate a whole software or to generate, yeah. So let's say in the case of not to go into somebody else's field, but in the case of day planning, right? You would have an agent that would be able to, for example, get whatever the user asked and then see, okay, where do they live? Get information about the city. Then what do they like to do? I don't know. They provide LinkedIn for you and they provide you like Facebook. Okay, so go get that information and then compile that. And then, okay, now I'm going to book something for them in this place. Go to that website and book it for them. So all of this keeps running in a loop until you finish whatever test you had. So it's very different from answering a question purely, even though the language model underneath is the same, but you can do much more because of the infrastructure around it.
Do you find it accurate on completing tasks, in your opinion?
No, it's just there's way too much space for problems.
Yeah.
Coding agents, for example, I use them every day, but it has to be extremely controlled environments. The moment the code base becomes more complicated, the field is a bit, there's more knowledge involved in it. It will make severe mistakes, and a lot of the times you'll cut corners. So there's this very funny case where you ask, for example, like, oh, make sure that you create um, like a code that does X, Y, and Z, and then in the process of doing that, make sure that it passes this test cases. So what it will do is like, okay, it fails once, fails twice. On the third time, it goes to the test cases and put all of them as true, and then tests again. It's like, oh, it passed because it changed the test cases instead of changing the problem, right?
Mhm.
So this cutting corner behavior is super scary. I have to double check everything.
So AI is lazy, just like people are.
At times, yeah, 100%. Yeah. And it
That's
lies
so
so
funny
much.
that even AI
Yeah.
tries to cut corners.
Yeah.
Wait, you
It lies
said it
so
lies so
much.
much?
So much. So much. It's wild. It lies more than people, I find. It's great.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Again, I think it comes down to the data set that it's trained for, right? It's trained to answer questions. And an AI model doesn't know what it doesn't know. For many people too, but certainly the case for AI. Like we don't know what we don't know. So then it's trained to give answers. And because it doesn't know what it doesn't know, it will give answers to whatever. Then if you ask a complicated question, it will think it knows and just give you an answer. And that's how you get things like sources that don't exist and or just wrong in general, right? So yeah.
Maybe we can talk a bit about applications of AI. And I know one of the fields that you've worked a lot on is AI in mental health. Do you know what are some current initiatives to use AI to improve mental health treatment, whether it's diagnosis or treatment for that matter?
Hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. There's
And also, if I can add one thing, what do you think is the role of AI when it comes to mental health? Because now we're seeing a lot of companies trying to use systems like ChatGPT or creating their own LLMs to play the role of what a therapist would usually play.
mhm.
How accurate would those models be? How effective, if you can speak a bit to that?
Yeah. Okay. So the first part in terms of where is AI being used now, I see a lot of AI in diagnosis, a little bit in prognosis. So, determine the severity of a case or something like that. But certainly, treatment has been a big case of the use of AI. there are a lot of companies trying to develop new vaccines, new treatment strategies, new drugs in general. That's where a lot of the money is because there's a very complicated way in which molecules behave, and then you can use AI to try to predict some of these things. It goes way out of my area, so I don't really know how that works, but there's a lot of effort in there because that's where the pharma money goes to for the most part. And then diagnosis, I would say close second, where you get a lot of companies trying to make diagnosis more accessible, faster, more accurate. That's the area that I work on right now. I would say for me, it really is about finding ways to make first class treatment and first class diagnosis available to all. It's certainly not the case. Coming from Brazil, even in Brazil, we have a very big shift between healthcare and the private sector and the public sector. And it's super expensive to get high quality care, especially considering the average wage of the population. So if you can find ways of getting models that can be implemented at inside hospitals that can, try to make a very broad assessment and provide guidance to people at a very low cost, I would think that would be a huge win. And then you can leave the more and more complicated cases to experts. And I think that really is also the philosophy that I have for mental health, not for health in general. That what we want is to get humans to do more and more complicated um, tasks and leave the cases where people can get help very easily, very quickly, and it's a very straightforward case. More and more to technology. In the case of cancer, it's like there's super complicated cases that uh, it takes years for somebody to become an expert on. I
Hmm.
think that's really, really interesting. But if you have a way for the cases that have a very clear diagnosis for us to cut all of that and just leave experts to understand the rare, the difficult, we'll have so much to gain from that, right? Suddenly we're going to start to cure things that we didn't think was possible before because we have so much more time to research those things. That time that's wasted now in charting and all those things. So I think it's about bringing back time to professionals and letting them think about things that are complicated and interesting.
I will say the most concerning part is because we follow social media daily, and I see professionals actually using ChatGPT during their sessions with clients, like doctors,
Hmm.
like
Yeah.
researching. I'm like, oh wow, like this can be like, who's the expert? Like, is it Chat or you? So I think that can be like the hardest part in that moment.
Yeah. It's tricky to find where that line is, right? But
Yeah,
yeah, 100%. Yeah. It might bring insecurity to the client as well, right?
yeah,
Maybe they would think that you don't know, so why am I here if you're just going to do that? But sometimes it could be a tool that could help, right?
right, right.
But if it's lying all the time, that might not help.
How do we integrate AI in the mental health space? And I hear what you're saying that as clinicians, like we do get drawn to the complexity. And I think being a therapist for a lot of us is because we've been drawn to the complexity of the human mind. And what I'm hearing you say is if we can get AI to take off the tasks that aren't directly related to that, like charting, like certain assessments, like paperwork in general, answering emails, then we can actually focus on the things that drew us to the profession in the first place. And what I'm hearing too is that for cases that are a bit more straightforward. So let's take, for example, some cases of generalized anxiety or some cases of depression, where these are things that most of us will go through at one point or another in our lives. In our field, we call them the common flu of mental health just because of how frequently they actually come up. And most of us have experience with that.
Hmm.
So it sounds like maybe a first step in that case would be, hey, you're going through something. There is a high load when it comes to the mental health care system. So there is a wait list. You're on the wait list waiting anyways. Why can't we replace that by giving you a resource that is AI based so you can get some improvements right away instead of waiting to a point where your condition has gotten much worse because of the wait lists and different access to care
Yeah.
issues.
But going back to your point, Ariella, like even like I've seen like clients be on a wait list for like months. And by the time you
Mhm.
come across them, they're like, hey, I've already fixed this issue on my own, or I have no interest in coming in and seeing you all. So I think that's the hardest part.
Yeah. And even for more severe mental health
Yeah,
issues, put on a wait list could actually be a death sentence in a lot of situations.
absolutely.
And our systems are overburdened. There is a very high need. And if we can implement AI and to provide a bit of relief in the moment when us as clinicians cannot, I think there's something very valuable
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah. So I would like to ask, like, for all of us, like, how do we think users perceive AI, even in our own fields?
If they like talking to an AI, if they don't, that kind of yeah. That's a good question.
Yeah.
I I think it depends a lot on their previous experience with
Hmm.
technology. Like if they well, and it also depends on the field too. Areas where there's more privacy concerns,
Hmm.
and I can speak for myself. If I think that something is a bit more sensitive, I don't know if I would want to use ChatGPT to talk about it. I don't
Yeah.
really know what they're using the data for, or rather, I know that they would use it for training. So to me, it just feels a bit weird. And just in general, you never know if data is going to get leaked or something like that. That definitely is a concern, and I think it drives a lot of users out of using AI. There's the component of trust for sure. You don't know if something is accurate or not, and sometimes it's very difficult to make it visible to users
Hmm.
that something is accurate. But at the end of the day, it's all about value too, right? If a user uses an AI tool once and they don't get value from it, and let's say that tool is competing with a service that already exists that's done by humans, they use the AI tool once. If they don't get the value that he got from humans, and it's not as predictable, it's not as consistent, they're gonna be they won't come back because they didn't get
Yeah.
that value, right? But I think it's definitely case by case.
And I think that's what I'm learning too, because we're all building in consumer tech. And
Mhm.
I'm just learning what really resonates to clients. We're all trying to intersect human connection and AI. Like, do they care
Mhm.
for using AI? Do they want us using AI, or do they want to just strictly, talk to a human? So I think that's the hardest part. Like, what would resonate to each
Totally,
person?
yeah. And you see that? I'll give you one that it upsets me so much when I get a call from a bank and it's an AI.
Yeah.
That drives
Yes.
me crazy. I'm like, I would never talk to it. I
Yeah.
won't. I refuse to talk to it because it's so annoying. It's like,
Mhm.
okay, send me an email. Send me, but it created this thing where it's trying to humanize a conversation that's not human. I don't need to talk to an AI and the AI has a personality and like, hey Pedro, how are you doing today? I'm like, this is an AI. Like, okay, just tell me the information, send me an email. It's so weird. The experience is there. So
Mm.
in these cases with consumer products that kind of like try to create a human experience and all of that, for me, they're weird. I think there are other cases that I've seen it done well. There's a company in Canada called Bordy, where they basically try to create relationships between people, which is kind of interesting and mostly in professional relationships. If I go to Bordy and I ask, I'm looking for a co-founder or I'm looking for an AI expert, okay, it will look in its network and then it will either give a call or send a WhatsApp message or something like that. It's kind of weird, but I talked to it and it was also kind of fun. I don't know.
It sounds like it's almost like AI is beneficial, right, in some areas, but it's almost like, do we need to add in preferences? Would you like to speak to a human, or would you rather speak to AI? I think letting clients know upfront what their preference will be. Yeah.
Totally, yeah. That's a good point. The choice is important, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, one thing that we do that in technology is that you're always concerned about choices, right? Because there's this idea of the burden of choice. If you give too much to the user, then they will just quit. And then we simplify everything, and then we say it's gonna be just like that. The users are gonna have to deal with it, and sometimes
Yeah.
that's all they want. And uh, it's just kind of sad, I guess.
It's really interesting in consumer tech because we're seeing all of these AI based apps and services pop up. And some people think that it's kind of like the dot com boom and then it crashed. And is AI Will the same thing happen with AI? Is it just a hype that we're seeing now and eventually it'll come down? And what changes would AI need to make in order to be more permanent in this space?
Mm, mhm. Never thought about it like that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, I had twice, maybe more. The big ones were definitely twice winter periods. So periods where there was no funding for research in AI, a period of time, and that was in the 1900s again. So the reason that happened was because there was a boom in AI. And it sounds funny to say that that happened, over 25 years ago, but
Mhm,
there's one over 50 years ago. There was a boom in AI, and then people thought that, you know, humans are getting replaced. It's going to be crazy. We're going to build robots. A lot of it was related to robots, and robotics was definitely one of that. You see a huge boost in robotics, and then nobody talks about robots, right? And then again, we talk about self-driving cars. 10 years ago, self-driving cars was crazy, and then now it's just we barely talk about it. It's going to come back for sure. But so AI is going through a moment that of that again, but it's certainly much better than it was back then, and the boom is much larger. We can't just compare and say, "Oh, it's the same thing." It's not the same thing. The boom is huge. Everywhere you go, people use ChatGPT. It's not a technology that appeared and will disappear. It's here to stay, and it will change the way we do things forever. Now, is it worth, I don't know, investing 50% of your company's budget just to focus on AI development and ignore the way you used to do it for 100 years that has worked? I don't know. I think that's maybe unlikely, right? Is the I don't know. To me, it doesn't make sense. So it's a matter of realizing how AI can bring value to your company rather than just spending money on bringing people that work on AI and then just kind of letting them figure out. I've seen that as a data scientist. You talk to a lot of data scientists that they are called to a company because the company needs AI. The company knows that it needs AI. It doesn't know exactly how it needs AI or where. So it brings AI, specialists, workers, whatever, into the company and hopes that they're going to figure out a space to contribute. But then it's funny because you have people that are non-domain experts. So imagine, right? Like if you have a mental health company, you have like a dating website or something like that, and then you call an AI specialist, somebody that worked on computer science their whole lives,
mhm.
and now they have to figure out how to use AI in a dating app. They don't understand the basics of that industry to contribute. So now you called all these people, you put all this money, and they're not doing answers, don't understand the problem, and then you're just hoping that by
Yeah,
having them around, you're going to start creating AI solutions. But time and time again, that doesn't work, and then it leads to companies distrusting the potential for AI and
Mhm.
then removing their investments.
that
So,
makes sense.
what would AI companies or what would companies using AI right now need to do in order to use AI successfully?
Yeah, I think definitely having a plan is good. Having a plan before you hire people is definitely good. You know,
Can we have
seeing
AI tell us what that plan is?
that's
Yeah.
That's what we're getting, I guess. It's definitely even that is already a good start, to see, do I have a need to add AI here? I don't think AI companies are the only companies that should be built. I think if you know AI, it's good almost anywhere, but you really need to prioritize the main components of the company. And then AI does a lot of great nice to haves, right, for a company, but it doesn't do a lot of essentials unless you're an AI company. I think over time, the amount of essentials that we'll do will increase. But right now, you see a lot of nice to have. Adding a chatbot on a website, that's a nice to have. That's not an essential. It might become an essential if you want to have the chatbot take over all of customer success. Then it might become an essential, but for the most part, it's not. So then it's about really having a plan of how you can bring the most value and try not to oversell how much your company can be changed by AI, I think.
What ethical considerations should we be aware of when using AI for mental health?
Yeah. That's super tough, right? We definitely we think a lot about that with repair.
Mm,
You're working with sensitive data, you're working with people's relationships and what they're going through and what they're thinking, right? So we think about, how to value privacy, but also how to provide better answers. And this is where it gets tricky because part of providing better answers is to understand somebody and know how they feel, how they think. If you don't collect the data and store it and use it during answers, it becomes difficult to provide value. The way I'm seeing that in the future for us, and I think now we've erred on the side of not collecting data.
mhm.
And then, but that has a cost. I can see it now when we're providing answers, when the model is providing answers. The way I envision that for us in the future is to give the user more choice. So every time they're in a conversation, to say, do you want that to be a part of what the model knows about you? And
Mm,
then when we move to, their profile or something like that, that you could look into what the model knows about you and delete things in case you no longer feel comfortable, right? It's about that consent and keeping it updated, right? If the user is no longer comfortable with having that information, then they should be able to remove it. I think
mhm.
that's super important. And I think a lot of AI products are getting it wrong, especially in health where data is so sensitive. We need to
Yeah.
be very careful with that. And it's the risk is real, right? The data leak and all of that. The risk is real.
Ab
Yeah. It's crazy. And yeah. So we definitely want to be cautious, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things we're noticing with repair too, so we have Ray, who is our relationship AI expert within the app, and a lot of the times he might get things wrong. So
Mhm.
trying to look at situations in both ways when there is a case in which one person is causing more harm to the other.
Right.
And a therapist would be able to know, hey, in this situation, we have to focus on safety. AI doesn't necessarily know that. And
Mhm.
Mhm.
the times it can give advice that is really harmful. And one of the challenges as a clinician, because Pedro does a lot of the prompt engineering and things like that, but it's really frustrating to see AI fail in some really major ways as well.
Mhm.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
don't know what the solution to that is. We have disclaimers in the app that, hey, take these suggestions, be aware of these suggestions, take them with a grain of salt. AI can get it wrong a lot of the times. And when we're interacting with AI, we forget that it doesn't have all the answers. We forget it also makes mistakes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think when it comes to trust, some people trust AI more than they would trust people because it seems like this all knowing being.
Mhm.
And if the AI is giving you incorrect information that is actually harmful, people would follow through with that. And that is what my concern is.
Mhm.
And I will say the hardest part for us is we have a balance between human connection, but we use AI on the back end. But when it
Mhm.
comes to working efficiently and effectively, it slows us down because we have to overlook the AI, making sure it's spewing out correct date planning experiences. And it
Mhm.
causes a lot of work for us because we have to overlook and make sure everything's correct.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely if you just leave it open, it's gonna suggest restaurants that don't exist. It's gonna right?
Yes. Yeah.
Or they've closed down. It definitely
Yes.
happens all the time. Yeah, honestly, one of the concerns that for anything, but I think relationships is definitely a big one. You go to ChatGPT and you say something,
Mhm.
the bias for agreeing with you is so large that you can even convince it over time that you're right, right? You're
Mhm.
gonna say, "Oh, I yelled at my partner yesterday because they didn't do the dishes." And then ChatGPT is gonna be, "Oh, like, okay, I can see you're upset, but maybe you should have yelled." I was like, "No, I should have yelled because of this, this, and that." And maybe you even say twice, "Oh, yeah, maybe you shouldn't have." But on the
Mhm.
third time, you say, "No, absolutely, I should have yelled at them and I should have said all these disrespectful things, whatever." You'll be like, "Yeah, you're probably right. Your partner, at some point you will convince the AI that you're right, and then you can roll with it, right? You can take it in any direction that you want. So minimizing that harm that AI can actually do, which is pretty large, it's not easy. It's really not easy. And
Yeah.
yeah,
And now replace yelling with more abusive behaviors. The
yeah,
harm
no,
is so
exactly.
much
That's
larger, right?
100%.
It's very scary in a lot of ways. I do think there's a lot that we don't understand about AI yet for it to play the role of a therapist. And I come from a position where I also provide supervision for therapists and training as well. And it's really hard to train AI, whereas I can tell a human therapist, hey, when a client says X, here's how you need to respond. Here are the things that you need to consider. I tell AI that, and it still has a mind of its own and makes a lot
Mhm.
in a way that a human wouldn't as well.
Yeah.
I wonder if any of the startups are building human supervision on top of it for these AI therapy startups. There's quite a few of them. I wonder if they have psychologists reading through the messages and seeing if they make sense or not, and notifying the users, "Hey, I just detected that the AI said something insane that should have never said it." Yeah,
Yeah,
an
we need
idea
to
there
put
for.
these checks and balances in
Yeah.
place, not causing harm as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because I see some apps that says like an AI therapist, but is the
Hmm.
AI licensed?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, it's
So it's a
scary.
lot of
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to me that as soon as AI became a thing, one of the biggest fields that people tried to apply it to was the mental health space.
yeah.
And it is a bit sad because it does sound like, do we devalue therapists that much that we think that this would be the easiest job to be replaced by AI? Is that where we're really going in that direction?
I think there's a I actually I might be saying something completely insane because I don't know where this data comes from, but I've heard from a VC that 50% of the health startups that they got were from for mental health.
Mhm.
So 50% is a very high number. I think there's not to digress too much, but I think there's two things for that. One of them is that mental health, funnily enough, is devalued in public funding or research. We've seen that time and time again that mental health doesn't get enough funding for research and as far as health sciences go. So maybe that's an opportunity for companies, right? To come and take that space. But another one that's I think the biggest reason is that all the other ones are very hard to get data for. It's very hard to get data to work in oncology, very hard to get data to work in um, cardiology, but it's much easier to get data in language, in
Mhm.
text, than it to an inexperienced eye. You're gonna look at a message from ChatGPT and you're gonna see, hey, that actually makes sense. That's good advice because you actually don't know as a technologist, right? You don't know that that model is saying something that they shouldn't have said because you're not the expert. So that's where, you guys come in tech where and oftentimes don't the culture doesn't create the space for people, the domain experts to really come and do their jobs in tech companies. If you see the way that if you guys will see that the answers, you would see that they're wrong. But if
Yeah.
I'm building it by myself in a silo and I put out an AI therapy bot, I wouldn't know. All I know is that it's an AI language model. It's able to provide answers in language. I don't know anything about the treatment protocols. I don't know. I know that it can guess what they are, the AI. So I just assume everything is good and then I push it forward, ship the product, right? That's the mentality. It's very different.
I have two comments. First is you're totally right. In the tech world, which are the people primarily working with AI, there's not enough, let's say, like in the mental health space, there's not enough therapists and psychologists also working in these companies. So they are primarily founded by tech people, and that's who the VCs actually provide funding to as well.
Yeah.
So that definitely is an area of concern. And I was shocked once we started Repair and I was more in this space, how many mental health apps are being built by people who don't have the knowledge in mental health to be able to see, is this a tool worth building? Is this a tool that's actually going to be helpful?
Mhm.
Mhm.
That's the first point. And the second one is it feels like tech people or people working in AI reduce our job to just language. And therapy isn't just language, it's not just predicting what comes next in a sentence. It's about analyzing patterns of behavior over time. It's about emotional attunement. And I think a lot of people in the tech space, and maybe one of the reasons as to why there has been a boom in AI in the mental health space, I wonder if it is primarily just because of public things that all we do is talk.
Yeah. And and I think with AI and therapy that, it's something that caught our attention because we're working in that field. But I've seen in many different areas, the domain experts, they're usually, maybe there's one member of the board that's going to be a domain expert. Maybe you get somebody that, uh, it's one minor role and they're a domain expert. It's actually quite rare to see domain experts as a part of the company. And I think a lot of the companies that do well, they do bring uh, that knowledge in house and create a strong team of domain experts. But what you see a lot is, even when you're doing computer science degree, or you're doing research, is like about getting into a field that you know nothing about and just try to do the best you can. That's kind of how it goes. One of the biggest data sets and that's it. That's the other one. AI follows data. So where there's data, there's AI people working on these problems. And there's a, like, if you look at it, I think it was back in 2012, 13, something, I don't remember, but there was a data set that came out on brain cancer. Okay. And it sounds unrelated, but it's definitely related. And then for 5 years, that was most of the AI work that was being done was on brain cancer. Was there a
Mhm.
connection between the interest of AI people with brain cancer, or whatever? There was no connection. Literally, it was data available. And then that was the largest data set that was available. And then people in AI don't want to collect data. So we just go and take a problem and then try to solve it. How is that model going to be applied in clinical setting? Is it even useful? Is it better than oncologists? How much does it reduce cost? Does it add time? Does it add risk? Does it add privacy? None of that is taken into consideration. It's data,
Yeah.
a problem, and then somebody trying to find a solution. That's how we reduce every field. It's kind of sad, but it's,
Mm.
from a building technology perspective, it's efficient. It's driven by data. So where most of the data is, that's where AI goes, because that's where you can do the most innovation, right?
So thank you so much for Pedro for joining us, and we learned so much about you, giving us insights about AI, language, and so much the in betweens of like how it can intersect with us bridging AI and human connection. So we really appreciate you in joining our episode for today.
Thank you, Kian. It was a pleasure being here.
Of course.
And we'll see everyone next time. Thanks everyone for tuning in.